Hi everybody, my name is Brady and we're back with another React video, and today we're going to be checking out a video from Weird History. I've not seen any videos from this channel yet. I've had a lot recommended to me. I've scrolled down to try to pick one and I really do like the selection. I think it really fits the title of the channel. There's a lot of really narrow subject matter, which is always a whole lot of fun. This is one that I thought would be really cool because I may be wrong. I think I learned about this story, must have been in middle school, so it's been a really long time at this point, but I vaguely remember it. The story of the deadliest shark attack in US history. I'm pretty sure this is about the USS Indianapolis. I think that's the name of the ship. It was hit by a torpedo and the crew was lost at sea, which is a very interesting story. If it's not that, then I don't know what it could be. So we're going to get this started and have a little chit chat about it. It should be fun.
All hands on deck. Man your battle stations.
Ooh.
The tragedy of the USS Indianapolis is considered one of the gravest disasters in the history of the United States Navy. If you've seen Steven Spielberg's 1975 mega-hit Jaws, one of the most riveting moments in the movie is a speech by the character Quint recounting the slaughter of the crew of the USS Indianapolis by a school of sharks.
I'll never put on a life jacket again.
If you thought some clever screenwriter just made it up for the film, well, allow us to fill you in on all.
Oh, it's very real.
Today, we're going to take a look at the deadliest shark attack in human history.
And you're always told that sharks don't really attack people like that. So I don't know exactly what triggered this, pretty significant shark attack. I'd imagine the only reason they would attack people is if they were starving and desperate. I've been told that that can be a cause for the exceptions. If they are starving and desperate, they'll do what they have to do. But they were kind of in the middle of the ocean. I can't imagine the sharks had a shortage of food. As far as sharks getting desperate goes, I think that's often when they wander into places where they normally wouldn't be, into waters they're not accustomed to.
But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel and let us know what other survival stories you...
Whatever. I like he's doing.
Okay, who's up for
I don't know if he's putting on a voice or not, but I like it.
Waters of history. Time to get your toes wet. On July 26, 1945, the USS Indianapolis completed a mission that would change world history when it delivered the components for the first operational atomic device to the island of Tinian. The parts would be assembled into the notorious atomic bomb known as Little Boy, and just a few days later, it would be dropped on the Japanese city of Hiroshima, wiping out an estimated 80,000 people. After completing the delivery, the Indianapolis was sent to join the USS Idaho in the Philippines. There they would assist in preparations for an invasion of the Japanese mainland. The ships...
I didn't know what the Indianapolis was actually delivering, though. So that actually helps me fit it in a much larger narrative around the war. Imagine if they'd gotten to it earlier, the disaster that could have been. I assume it would have been quite the disaster.
Set out alone for its new destination at a clip of 17 knots. It was smooth sailing at first, but the USS Indianapolis would soon find its journey coming to a sudden and violent halt.
Now that I think about it, it would still be a disaster, but when you think about it, the quantity of people killed would have been less than were killed when the atomic bomb was actually dropped, because it is limited to the ship itself. Not to compare potential tragedies or something, but that just occurred to me. And that would be a much different history there.
It was just after midnight on July 30th, 1945, when a Japanese submarine launched 2 torpedoes into the side of the Indianapolis. It was a direct hit that split the ship into...
Is that from the movie?
In order to
I
abandon
know there's a
the ship
movie about it.
But not quickly enough for some. It took just 12 minutes for the giant vessel to sink, and many didn't make it out. In fact, about 300 men were still trapped inside when the ship went down. They were never heard from again. Another 900 or so went into the water. They didn't know it yet, but their fate would be arguably worse than the ones who went down with the ship.
Yeah, there was a good amount.
The Indianapolis went down fast, and the resulting chaos led to numerous injuries and a lack of proper equipment for those who got off. Approximately 879 servicemen survived the initial sinking, but many didn't have the time to get life preservers, so they had to constantly fight to stay afloat.
Yeah, I recall one of the things that really stuck to me was watching the film in middle school, and I believe the ship was blown up like right in the beginning. Like the whole movie was really just on, like, clinging on to their little lifeboats or clinging on to whatever they could to stay above water. That was like most of the experience, because I believe they're out there for quite some time. And yeah.
The ones who did manage to get life vests only had it slightly better, as they found themselves unable to do much but helplessly bob in the water. Many of the sailors were hurt, having suffered gashes or broken bones when the torpedoes struck. In the water, without even a life raft, they had no way to treat their injuries. As if all that wasn't bad enough, almost all of them were covered in fuel that was leaking out of the wreckage of the ship. It was so overwhelming, men were already beginning to die in each other's arms, floating in the ocean. The Indianapolis sank fast, but in those 12 minutes, the heroic crewmen sent out SOS signals until they were absolutely unable to do so any longer. Those SOSs were received by the Navy, but for reasons that remain unknown to this very day, they weren't taken seriously. Even when the ship failed to arrive on time at its destination, no one got suspicious.
That's actually something I didn't know that part. I didn't know they even got a distress signal out. I assumed it took so long because there was no communication at all. And the fact that we don't know why those were ignored is actually like an extra ripple that I'm incredibly curious about. But the fact that we don't know also leaves me a little bit unsatisfied with that. So I don't know.
No search parties were sent to look for the ship or its survivors. In fact, no action was taken at all. By sunrise, there was blood in the water, literally, and sharks came to investigate. Aware of their presence, the survivors attempted to stay together in groups as they bobbed in the water. But regardless of how hard they tried, eventually someone would break away and the currents would carry them off. Once a survivor was isolated from the group, the sharks would move in and quickly pounce. Survivors report that everyone could hear the screams before a body was pulled under, and
I don't know why they would do
the
that,
life vest
though.
would pop back up to the surface. This,
Like, I understand they're sharks, and sharks occasionally attack, but it's still incredibly rare, and we know more now about sharks than we did even back then. Like, but I don't know why the sharks would like target the people like that, because it seems pretty well agreed upon that they're not typically ones to attack humans. It's just not their it's not their prey.
continued for days.
I guess we're just accepting
While the
this.
shark attacks remained a constant danger to the men in the water.
So I can't
There was one thing
think of
that
a
gave
reason.
some of them a stay of execution. Some of the bodies that were trapped in the Indianapolis when it sank would occasionally float up towards the surface. The sharks were just as happy to feed on these corpses, as they were a lot less trouble. Unfortunately, while the floaters in the ship slowed the decimation of the survivors, in the long run,
This
it
is
would
not
be
the
enough
film
to
I'm
save
familiar
them.
with. The one I'm
By
thinking of
that
is
point,
much older.
the sharks were in a feeding frenzy, and there were only so many who survived. So despite the reprieve, the survivors continued to endure more days of shark attacks.
So every time the sharks were coming in, we would kick and scream and do things that we thought would drive the sharks away, and they did drive them away.
Sharks
On
play
the surface,
mind
the
games.
survivors of the Indianapolis could see dozens of fins circling them at any given time. Beneath the water, the sharks kept up their attacks. However, they didn't always pounce immediately. In fact, sometimes they took the time to psych out their prey, Apparently, the sharks would occasionally bump against the sailors in the water, but not necessarily attack them. This tactic was apparently meant to lull the sailors into a false sense of security, because shortly after, the shark would attack. The sharks dragged their victims down into the depths. With each attack, the water grew more bloody, which in turn just led to greater bloodlust in the sharks. The sharks were certainly the most immediate problem, but they were far from being the only danger the survivors had to contend with. As they were drifting in salt water, the men had nothing to drink, and since they were out there for several days, many died of thirst. Any who attempted to drink the salt water soon became delirious with hallucinations.
This is always a thing that ends up happening when people are lost at sea. Even people who know they're not supposed to drink salt water, you get to this point of desperation where something in your head just convinces you it's what you gotta do. I mean, you either just let things go as they do, don't do anything, you drink the salt water, or to get hydration, then there's the issue of like, who are we eating first? Like, it's actually there's a really interesting book that I read for, I think it was a political science course. I think it's called "Is Eating People Wrong?" and it had a story about cannibalism at sea and kind of the legal consequences of a case of cannibalism at sea, where they hydrated using the blood of a freshly killed person on the boat with them who was gonna die anyway. And so they have this big like legal whatever, like, can these guys be forgiven for cannibalizing this dude? Like, they were desperate, they had no other choice, they would have died otherwise. This guy would have died anyway, and it's a very interesting book. I like I said, I think it's called "Is Eating People Wrong?" It's a very interesting legal conundrum, so I highly recommend it.
The life vests were also becoming increasingly waterlogged, which made it much harder to stay afloat. Consequently, several of the men died in the water before the sharks could even get near them.
No cannibalism here, as far as I'm aware.
Several of the survivors found
As a
some
side
crates
note.
floating in the water and lashed them together. While the crates weren't sturdy enough to use as a raft, they could be used for another important purpose.
Wait, is that
drying
Nicolas
the
Cage?
lifesavers. The men would wring the life vests out by
know he was
hand,
in one of
throw
those
them
movies.
on top of the crate raft, and then put them back on when they were dry. This system allowed more of the survivors to stay afloat for longer. As a bonus, one of the crates contained some partially rotten potatoes, which the survivors carefully rationed to sustain themselves as long as possible.
Dude,
It was
potatoes
11
grow
on the
extra
fourth day
potatoes.
when the survivors were accidentally spotted by Lieutenant Wilbur C. Gwynn, who was flying a bomber on a routine patrol. He immediately radioed for help. The USS Cecil J. Doyle, a destroyer that was relatively nearby, was alerted, and on his own authority, the captain diverted his ship to rescue the survivors. Lieutenant Adrian Marks was the pilot of a seaplane assigned to assist with the rescue efforts by dropping rafts and supplies. After witnessing survivors being attacked by sharks, Marks used his plane to pick up the lone sailors most in danger of being eaten. The plane eventually became so full, he had to tie survivors to the wings with parachute cords. And
That's not okay to laugh at. Sorry, it just sounds ridiculous.
He landed that big goose. I saw him when he landed, and as he came in and hit that first swell, and the plane shot back up in the air. I didn't know it, but he tore up one motor. He ruptured the pontoon, but he set that big goose down.
when the captain of the Doyle arrived on the scene, he threw caution to the wind and pointed a searchlight into the sky to alert other rescue vehicles in the area. As it was wartime, this move put his ship in massive jeopardy. But he could tell time was of the essence. Even given his resolve, by the time the rescue operations were over, just 317 of the original 879 survivors made it back to shore alive. A disheartening figure, especially given that the original crew had consisted of 1,196 men. All of the rest had succumbed to starvation, thirst, injuries, or the sharks. Everyone in the Navy was shocked and outraged at what had been allowed to happen to the crew of the Indianapolis.
Yeah.
Because their mission had been to deliver the parts of an atomic bomb, no one was exactly at liberty to tell the world what exactly had happened. The United States government kept the incident a
explains a
secret
lot.
for 2 full weeks. During that time, the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were both blasted, the former with a bomb made from the parts delivered by the USS Indianapolis. The U.S. finally released the news about the Indianapolis on August 15, 1945, the same day Japan announced its surrender. This almost guaranteed it would be buried by the news of victory.
I mean, yeah. Let's be real.
Several months after the disaster, Charles McVeigh, captain of the USS Indianapolis, found himself being court-martialed. Apparently,
Yeah.
McVeigh had failed to run his ship in
There's an amazing... I was hoping he was going to go into this, because there's an amazing twist in his court-martial. You might be surprised at who shows up in the story. You might not be thinking, like, who could show up in his court-martial? Oh, it's quite the movie-level twist. I wasn't sure if it was real or not when I saw this.
a zigzag course that would have helped throw any Japanese submarines off their trail.
That's
You're
bull.
wondering whether this is a case of the Navy scapegoating
wouldn't
a
have-
captain for some made-up offense to take the embarrassment
That wouldn't
off
have
of
worked.
itself. You're not alone. Many have pointed out that McVeigh was the only captain who was court-martialed for losing a ship during the entirety of World War II. Even Congress eventually decided the charge was bogus and cleared his name of any wrongdoing in 2000. Sadly, it was posthumous.
In
as McVeigh
2000.
had taken his own life in 1968.
Oh, it didn't say it?
When
From what I heard, this is actually a really interesting bit. One of the Japanese soldiers who was like, or one of the guys who was piloting the submarine that shot the torpedo that got the ship, actually testified on McVeigh's behalf during his trial, and pretty much advocated for the dude, which is insane. That is absolutely crazy, because this is the guy who caused all of this to happen, and then, like, okay, we're not at war anymore. He steps into the courtroom and actually defends the guy, which is kind of crazy. Assuming that's a real story. I don't think the movie would make that up. That seems like it would be too crazy to make up.
multiple people die from shark attacks, it's usually the result of a series of strikes by the same animal, limiting the number of attacks that are possible. For example, in 1916, a shark known as the Matawan man-eater, which we did in a previous video, killed 4 people and attacked a 5th. However, those 5 incidents unfolded over the course of 10 days. Finding anything that even compares with the nightmarish carnage experienced by the survivors of the USS Indianapolis is nigh impossible. The sheer quantity of sharks and the immense length of time they were given to feed made the incident deadly on a scale that is unlikely to be seen ever again. So what do you
Hold on.
think? Is this your biggest nightmare survival scenario? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird...
He sounds a little bit like Stephen Colbert. What's the guy's name? Yeah, it's Mochitsura Hashimoto. That's a hard one. I believe that is the guy, and I'm looking it up right now, and I believe it says called to testify on behalf of the yeah that was actually real. So yeah, this guy who ended up being the cause of that dude's problems ended up like testifying in the trial, which is absolutely insane, with all the Americans he killed in the process, and he's like in the American courtroom, like, but that just kind of shows they're just serving their own country in their own way. Man, what a story that is. And that's a detail that should always be pointed out when mentioning the trial, because it's such a good twist. It's very rare that real life has such perfect twists. Sometimes real life can be disappointing in that way and unsatisfying, but that's satisfying. I enjoyed this video. That was a lot of fun. I hope you guys liked it too. I want to check out more stuff from Weird History because I love their titles. They look so fun and inspiring, and there's so many interesting things that are narrow subjects that I'd love to learn a little bit more about. So if you guys like this, I might add it to the to the rotation of things I check out. Let me know. All right. Thank you, and I will see you next time. All right.